Two policemen were patrolling at 4 a.m. when they spotted an older man stumbling down the street, wobbling and barely able to walk straight. Concerned, they stopped him to check if he was drunk and to ensure he wasn't planning to drive. "Sir, where are you coming from at this hour?" one officer asked. The man slurred. "From the best place in the world. My favorite bar. The drinks are amazing, and the girls are even better. Friendlier than you can imagine." He winked at the officers. "Sounds like quite the spot," one officer replied with a chuckle. "But where are you headed now? Shouldn't you be in bed?" "Sleep? No way," the man scoffed. "I'm on my way to a lecture about the dangers of alcohol, the harm caused by smoking, and the importance of good social behavior." The officers exchanged skeptical looks. "Really?" one said. "At this time of night? You expect us to believe someone's giving a lecture on that?" The man let out a deep sigh and said, "Tell that to my wife." "Last night, my wife demanded I take her someplace expensive, so I took her to a gas station, and that's when the fight started. After retiring, I went to the Social Security office to apply. The clerk asked for my driver's license to verify my age. I checked my pockets and realized I'd left my wallet at home. "Sorry," I said. "I'll have to come back later." She replied, "Unbutton your shirt." Confused, I opened my shirt, revealing my curly silver chest hair. "That's proof enough," she said as she processed my application. When I got home, I excitedly told my wife what had happened. "You should have dropped your pants," she said. "They might have given you disability, too." And that's when the fight started. At my high school reunion, my wife and I sat at a table when I noticed a drunken woman sitting alone nearby. "Do you know her?" my wife asked. "Yeah," I sighed. "She's my old girlfriend. I hear she started drinking right after we broke up and hasn't been sober since." "My goodness," said my wife. "Who knew someone could celebrate that long?" And that's when the fight started. At a restaurant, the waiter took my order first. "I'll have the strip steak, medium rare," I said. The waiter asked, "Aren't you worried about the mad cow?" "Nah, she can order for herself." And that's when the fight started. My wife stood in front of the mirror frowning. "I feel old, fat, and ugly," she said. "I need you to give me a compliment." "Your eyesight's near perfect," I replied. And that's when the fight started. I tried to convince my wife to buy a case of Miller Lite for $14.95. Instead, she bought a jar of cold cream for $7.95. I told her the beer would make her look better at night than the cold cream. And that's when the fight started. My wife asked, "Does this dress make my butt look big?" "Not as much as the one you wore yesterday," I replied. And that's when the fight started. At 3 a.m., a loud noise woke us up. My wife jumped out of bed yelling, "Oh no, that must be my husband." Panicking, I leapt out the window naked and landed hard on the ground. After running through a thorn bush and sprinting to my car, I realized I was her husband. When I stormed back inside, I shouted, "Why the hell were you yelling?" She replied, "Well, why were you running?" And that's when the fight started. On Saturday morning, I got up early, dressed quietly, and grabbed my fishing gear. But as I backed the truck out, the rain started pouring down. I sighed, pulled back into the garage, and went back to bed. Cuddling up to my wife, I whispered, "The weather out there is awful." She murmured, "Can you believe my idiot husband is out fishing in this?" And that's when the fight started. For our anniversary, I asked my wife where she wanted to go. "Somewhere I haven't been in a long time," she said, smiling. I suggested, "How about the kitchen?" And that's when the fight started. My wife and I were watching Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in bed. I turned to her and asked, "Do you want to have sex?" "No," she replied. "Is that your final answer?" I asked. "Yes," she said without looking at me. "Then I'd like to phone a friend," I said. And that's when the fight started. When I was a kid, a psychiatrist gave me an aptitude test. He placed a pitchfork, a wrench, and a hammer on his desk. He told the nurse, if he grabs the pitchfork, he'll become a farmer. If he picks the wrench, he'll be a mechanic. And if he chooses the hammer, he'll be a carpenter. I grabbed the nurse. The town was so dull that one day the tide went out and never came back. Every time my wife takes the car out, she comes back with the same question. Guess who I ran into? A piano tuner spent 5 hours tuning the piano at a nightclub. When he handed over the bill, it was just £3. The manager said, "Is that all? You worked for 5 hours and only charged £3. The tuner replied, "What? A dog bit a chunk out of my leg the other day." A friend asked, "Did you put anything on it?" I said, "No, he liked it as it was." My wife is really into DIY. Every time I ask her to fix something, she says, "Do it yourself." My wife loves decorating, but she overdoes it. The other day, I opened the fridge and found a lampshade on the light bulb. I once swam the English Channel. But lots of people have done that, someone said. "Lengthwise?" I replied. She's always smiling. She's the only woman I know whose teeth are sunburnt. A leopard went to see a psychiatrist. "Every time I look at my wife," he said, "I see spots before my eyes." The psychiatrist said, "That's only natural." "But doctor," the leopard replied, "she's a zebra." A drunk was brought into a police station. He pounded his fist on the counter and demanded, "Why have I been arrested?" The sergeant replied, "You've been brought in for drinking." The drunk said, "Oh, that's all right then. Let's get started. I always sit in the back of the plane. It's much safer. You never hear of a plane backing into a mountain." A man walks into a marriage counselor's office all by himself. The counselor, puzzled, says, "This is unusual. Marriage counseling usually works better when both partners attend. But since you've already paid for the session, we'll make it work. Let's pretend your wife is here and I'll play her role." The man stiffens, looking nervous. The counselor, now in character, says, "Honey, are you unhappy in our marriage?" "I can't complain about that," the man replies. "Is it our intimacy?" "Nope, can't complain about that either." "Is it the way I treat you?" "Definitely can't complain about that." Frustrated, the counselor breaks character. "This isn't getting anywhere without your wife. Why don't you bring her to the next session?" The man shakes his head. "That won't work. It has to be just you and me, and no role-playing." "Why's that?" "To you I can complain." At school, little Johnny's classmate told him, "Most adults have at least one dark secret. If you say, 'I know the whole truth,' you can easily blackmail them." Intrigued, Johnny decided to try it out. When he got home, he said to his mom, "I know the whole truth." His mother's face went pale. She quickly handed him $20 and whispered, "Just don't tell your father." Johnny was thrilled. Later that evening, when his dad came home, Johnny greeted him at the door. "I know the whole truth," he said. His dad froze, then sighed, pulled out $40, and said, "Please don't tell your mother." The next morning, on his way to school, Johnny saw the mailman at the door. He decided to try one more time. "I know the whole truth," Johnny said confidently. The mailman's eyes widened, tears welling up. He dropped his mail bag, opened his arms wide, and exclaimed, "Then come give your daddy a big hug." After 35 years of marriage, a husband and wife went to counseling. When asked what the problem was, the husband launched into a passionate rant, listing every grievance from their decades together: neglect, lack of intimacy, loneliness, feeling unloved and unappreciated, an endless list of unmet needs. He went on and on until finally the therapist stood up, walked around the desk, and asked the husband to stand. Then she embraced him and kissed him long and passionately right in front of his wife. The husband sat back down in stunned silence, his complaints forgotten. Turning to the wife, the therapist said, "This is what your husband needs at least 3 times a week. Can you manage that?" The wife thought for a moment and replied, "Well, I can drop him off here on Mondays and Wednesdays, but Friday's our book club." A woman brought a baby into the doctor's office. After being taken into the exam room, the doctor checked the baby and noticed he wasn't gaining much weight. "Is he breastfed or bottle-fed?" the doctor asked. "Oh, he's breastfed," the woman replied. The doctor nodded and said, "Well, I'll need you to strip down to your waist." A bit surprised, the woman complied, removing her top and bra. The doctor began a detailed examination, pressing, kneading, and pinching both breasts for several minutes. Finally, he motioned for her to get dressed and said, "No wonder this baby is so hungry. You don't have any milk." The woman gave a wry grin and replied, "Well, of course I don't." Confused, the doctor asked, "Why not?" "Because I'm his aunt. But I sure am glad I brought him in today." With all the advances in fertility technology, a 65-year-old friend of mine recently gave birth. When she was discharged from the hospital and settled back home, I went to visit. "May I see the baby?" I asked eagerly. "Not yet," she said. "Let's have some coffee and chat for a bit." 30 minutes passed. "Can I see the baby now?" I asked again. "No, not yet," she replied. After another few minutes, I grew impatient. "All right, when can I see the baby?" "When he cries," she said firmly. "When he cries," I exclaimed. "Why do I have to wait until he cries?" "Because," she sighed, "I forgot where I put him, okay?" An extraordinarily handsome man believed it was his divine duty to marry the perfect woman so they could produce children of unparalleled beauty. With that mission in mind, he embarked on a quest to find her. After an exhaustive search along the East Coast with no success, he headed west. One day, he came across a farmer with 3 stunningly gorgeous daughters who took his breath away. He explained his noble mission to the farmer and asked for permission to marry one of them. The farmer shrugged and said, "They're all looking to get married, so go ahead and pick the one you like." The man dated the first daughter. The next day, the farmer asked, "How'd it go?" "Well," the man said, "she's beautiful, but she's just a wee bit pigeon-toed, hardly noticeable, but still—" The farmer nodded and suggested he try dating the second daughter, so the man did. The next day, the farmer asked for his thoughts. "She's lovely," the man admitted, "but she's just a wee bit cross-eyed. Not that you'd really notice." The farmer nodded again and said, "Well, why not try the third one?" The man went out with the third daughter. The next morning, he rushed to the farmer, beaming. "She's perfect, absolutely perfect. She's the one I want to marry." The wedding took place immediately. Months later, when their baby was born, the man eagerly visited the nursery, but his excitement turned to horror when he saw the baby. It was undeniably cute, but also had the ugliest little face he'd ever seen. Shaken, he went straight to his father-in-law and demanded an explanation. How could this happen, considering how perfect we both are? The farmer scratched his head and replied, "Well, she was just a wee bit, hardly noticeable, pregnant when you met her." After many years of hard work, Joe decided to treat himself to a long, relaxing stay at an exclusive Caribbean resort. While lounging on the beach, he was stunned to spot a former high school classmate he hadn't seen since graduation. This old friend, Pete, had been a bit of a burnout back in school, so Joe never expected to run into him here. Curious, Joe walked up to him and shook his hand. "Pete, it's Joe! From high school! It's been forever. You look great. You must be doing well for yourself." Pete leaned in and whispered, "I am. I'm a partner at a very successful law firm, but don't tell my mother." Joe raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" Pete lowered his voice. "She still thinks I'm a drug dealer from back in high school. She'd be terribly disappointed if she knew the truth about how I really make my money." Sally was driving home from a business trip in northern Arizona when she noticed an elderly woman walking along the side of the road. Since the trip was long and quiet, Sally decided to stop and offer the woman a ride. The elderly woman nodded silently in thanks and got into the car. As they resumed their journey, Sally tried to make small talk, but the woman remained silent, studying everything around her with keen interest. After a while, she noticed a brown bag sitting on the seat next to Sally. "What's in the bag?" the old woman asked. Sally glanced down at the bag and replied, "It's a bottle of wine. I got it from my husband." The woman fell silent again for a moment. Then, with quiet wisdom, she said, "Good trade." An elderly couple, Margaret and Bert, had just moved to Wyoming. Bert had always wanted a pair of authentic cowboy boots, so when he saw a pair on sale, he bought them and proudly wore them home. He sauntered into the kitchen, beaming, and asked his wife, "Notice anything different about me?" Margaret looked him over, then shrugged. "Nope," Frustrated, Bert stormed off to the bathroom, undressed, and returned to the kitchen completely naked except for the boots. He struck a pose and, this time a little louder, asked, "Notice anything different now?" Margaret glanced up, deadpan as ever. "Bert, what's different? It was hanging down yesterday, it's hanging down today, and it'll be hanging down tomorrow." Furious, Bert yelled, "And do you know why it's hanging down, Margaret?" "Nope, not a clue," she replied. "It's hanging down because it's looking at my new boots." Without missing a beat, Margaret calmly replied, "Should have bought a hat, Bert. Should have bought a hat." One day, 3 unemployed factory workers heard that a large food company was expanding and needed more staff, so they went downtown to apply for a job. After filling out their applications, each one was interviewed, and to their surprise, they were all hired. As they were waiting to be assigned their duties, the foreman walked by and spoke with the hiring boss. The foreman expressed concern, saying, "I don't think this is a good idea. One of these workers snapped for no apparent reason at his last job. The second one cracked up after severe mental stress. As for the third one, he's their father, and he's a bit odd, though I can't quite put my finger on it." The hiring boss reassured the foreman, saying, "Don't worry, we'll start them on something easy. After a week, we can reassess and see if they're a good fit." The foreman hesitated but agreed. "So what do you suggest they start with?" The boss smiled and said, "Let's put them in our cereal division. I'm sure Snap, Crackle, and Pop will do just fine down there." During roll call, the teacher asked the class to share what their mothers did for a living. One little girl proudly said her mother was a doctor, while another said her mom was an engineer. When it was little Johnny's turn, he stood up and said, "My mom's a streetwalker." Naturally, Johnny was sent to the principal's office. After 15 minutes, Johnny returned to the classroom. The teacher, concerned, asked, "Did you tell the principal what you said in class?" Johnny nodded and replied, "Yes." The teacher then asked, "What did the principal say?" Johnny grinned and said, "He said every job is important to our economy, gave me an apple, and asked for my phone number." A man was speeding down the highway, comfortably nestled among a group of cars traveling at the same speed, but as they passed a speed trap, he got nailed by an infrared speed detector. Sirens wailed, lights flashed, and he knew exactly what was coming. Grumbling, he slowed down and pulled over. The officer calmly approached his car, handed him a citation, received his signature, and was about to walk away when the man asked, "Officer, I know I was speeding, but it doesn't seem fair. There were plenty of other cars around me going just as fast. Why did I get the ticket?" The officer paused, then asked with a grin, "Ever go fishing?" Yeah," the man replied, taken aback. The officer smiled wider and said, "Ever catch all the fish?" A young man from Nebraska moved to Florida and went to a large, everything-under-one-roof department store to look for a job. The manager asked, "Do you have any sales experience?" The young man replied, "Yes, I was one of the best Bible salesmen back in Omaha." The manager liked him and offered him the job. "You can start tomorrow. I'll come by after we close to see how you did." His first day was tough, but he got through it. After the store had closed, the manager came down. "How many customers bought something from you today?" The young man responded, "One." "Just one?" "Our salespeople average 20 to 30 customers a day. How much was the sale?" $101,237.65. $101,237. Holy Mother of Mary! What did you sell him? "Well, it went like this. First, I sold him a small fish hook. Then I sold him a medium-sized fish hook, then a larger one. After that, I sold him a new fishing rod. When he told me he was going down the coast to fish, I said he'd need a boat. So we went to the boat department, and I sold him a twin-engine Boston whaler. Then he said his car couldn't pull it, so I took him to the automobile department and sold him a 4x4 truck with all the bells and whistles." The manager, utterly astounded, said, "So let me get this straight. A guy came in to buy a fish hook and you sold him a boat and a truck?" "No," the young man said with a grin. "He came in to buy tampons for his wife. I told him, 'Buddy, your weekend's shot. You might as well go fishing.'" A man receives an ad in the mail for a golf resort where everything costs just $1. Excited by the offer, he heads out for a weekend of fun in the sun. He plays a round of golf, which costs him $1. Dinner that evening is only $1. His room is just $1 a night. The day before he checks out, he plays one last round and stops by the pro shop to charge a sleeve of 3 balls to his room. When he checks out the next morning, he looks at the bill and sees golf, $1, dinner, $1, room, $1 sleeve of golf balls, $3,000. He asks the manager, "What is this? Everything else is $1, but you're charging me $3,000 for 3 golf balls." The manager responds, "I'm sorry, sir, but you didn't read the fine print in our brochure. That's what our golf balls cost." The man protests, "Well, if I wanted to spend that kind of money, I could have gone to that luxury hotel across the street and paid $1,000 a day for a room. At least there I'd know what I'm paying for." The manager shrugs and says, "That's right, sir. Over there, they get you by the room. Over here, we get you by the balls."